Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Meghan Craig. Meghan is with BSM, Baptist Student Ministries in Texas in the United States. And for those of you that don't know, it's a collegiate-focused ministry. And so, Meghan, I'll let you share with us a little bit more about that. But first of all, welcome, and I'm glad you could be with us on the SRS Podcast.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. This is a really honor to me.
Well, we get to interact with each other every now and then because you are a support-raising leader within BSM, and you're based out of Texas, right?
Yes, that's correct. I live in Texas, and I work in Texas. Everything I do is in Texas.
Were you born and raised in Texas also?
Yes.
Wow, you're like a walking Lone Star.
I know, that's right.
Okay, well, Meghan, the reason that I invited you on today is, first of all, I trust you, and I know you enough that you think well and speak well on support raising issues. But one of the things that I hear frequently from people who raise and live off support, particularly if they're in leadership, is that there's a culture that needs to change within the organization that they're with. And yet they're not always the person who is the decision maker. They might not be the president or be on the key executive team. And yet sometimes they can take that as it's a bit disenfranchising, a little bit like, well, I can't do anything about that. And yet you and I both know that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
And so this is a topic that when you and I were kicking around, doing this podcast, and you said the words or typed the words leading from behind, I was like, yes, perfect. That's exactly what we want to talk about. So tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then let's dig into this topic of leading from behind, or others might call it leading up. I think there's different ways of looking at that. But first, tell us a little bit more about what you do and how you find yourself in a place of being an influencer and yet not being the one who makes the final decision on things.
Sure, yeah. So I started in ministry 6 years ago. Well, 5 years ago, actually. 5 years ago. And when I landed at Tarleton State University, which is where I'm currently the associate director, I was just a intern, basically, and only had to raise $6,000. I was a volunteer, basically stipend. And then my director asked me to stay on, commit for 5 years. And I said, okay. And he said, you'll have to raise your support. And I said, how do you do that?
Right. But when you said full support at that point, he meant raise all of your salary at a minimum, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And I assume you also had to raise a little bit of organizational funding or some of your operational, or what did that look like?
So actually, I don't have to raise any of our operational budget. Okay. My director completely takes care of that.
Okay.
And so I do help in our ministry partner development for our organization. Sure. But I don't have to, I'm not the main person that raises that money.
But still, you were moving from an internship where you only had to raise $6,000. Not that that's not a lot of money.
Right.
But it was kind of a one-time raise this once, live off this for quite a while kind of thing.
Yes.
And now the game just changed.
Exactly. And I don't come from a family of missionaries. That's not a realm in something that's going on in my family. And so there's a lot of pushback, a lot of just mind shift that had to occur. Okay. So when I set out on this journey, my director said, you should go to a boot camp. Okay. And I went with one of my friends and his wife, who was also looking at doing the same thing, to a boot camp in Arkansas. That's where I met you and Micah. Right. And went through the boot camp and got raised support, but our organization had no sort of structure, sort of dynamic, anything like that for people who raise support.
Okay, so you're not that uncommon, by the way. So, but for those that are wondering, perhaps this is one of the first podcasts you've listened to. The boot camp that Meg you were just referring to is a Support Raising Solutions boot camp, and it is a world-class training for people that need to raise support. It digs into the biblical foundation, as well as some good readings, some videos to watch, some role play. It's an interactive, facilitated adult education learning thing that not everybody's had a chance to go through. But it is more and more, and we're glad to say it. We know it's helping kingdom workers like yourself. And so your organization encouraged you to go through that, which was fantastic, and it really helped you. And yet your organization didn't necessarily have all of the policies and pieces in place for you to really kind of follow through with some of your training. Would that be a safe and accurate way to say it?
It's pretty accurate. The only thing is my organization did not push it. Only my director pushed it. So there, one person within an organization of 150 people pushed this for us.
Okay. So you even had like some levels of influence and thought processes that were very much for you getting involved and getting spiritually healthy, vision driven, and fully funded.
Yes.
And yet other, I'm sure, wonderful people within the organization that had absolutely no clue about this concept. Okay.
That's correct.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we go to boot camp. I struggle my first year to get to full support because I worked all summer to raise my support. I got to 95%, and then we launched into campus ministry.
Yeah.
And if you're in campus ministry, you know the first month is insane. And
college campuses, a lot of fun, no sleep, lots of work.
Exactly. And so I made it to spring, coasting, basically. And my director's like, Meg, you need to take a step back. You need to get that 5%. So I took 2 weeks off and finished raising that amount of support.
And just to clarify, because I know what you meant, but what you said is slightly different. It wasn't 2 weeks of vacation.
No.
You took 2 weeks away from the campus.
Yes.
Because you were working on kind of finishing out that last part of your support team.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Exactly. And since then, I've stayed at full support, and it's been a joy.
Awesome.
And
so for how long now at this moment, approximately, how long has it been that you have been, quote unquote, fully funded?
4.5 years.
Okay.
4.5 years.
Okay. So for those that are wondering if it's possible for, I'm not going to say your age, Megan. That's up to you if you want to. But is it possible for a single lady in her 20s to raise and live off full support? The answer is most definitely yes. Okay.
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
Great.
So then myself and some of my coworkers who were living and ministering off of support said, what are we supposed to do? There's no structure. When are we supposed to have all this money in? What does it look like for the next year? What if I need to change my health insurance? All of these things, because we work inside of a culture that is HR oriented, business directed. So that what I mean by that is we don't have a lot of missionaries. Everybody gets a salary.
Okay.
And so we have 25 to 30 people who raise support inside of an organization of 150.
Okay, so you, in a lot of ways, you had created a new type of employee within this ministry organization.
Yes.
And though it sounds fantastic, I am certain that brought all sorts of organizational chaos.
Yes.
Okay.
So there was minimal training. We weren't pushing any sort of boot camp, anything like that. And I said to our state director, we really need to have some help for people who raise support. Okay. This is not enough.
Right.
And I and myself and multiple other people are struggling with communicating with our HR department, with higher ups, with our churches, because they weren't understanding. And so we need some help.
Okay. Okay.
And so from there, he said, okay, you do it.
You see the problem so clearly, why don't you address it?
Yes.
Okay.
And God, when I went to boot camp and worked on the Bible study, because there's a Bible study aspect when you sign up for a Support Raising Solutions boot camp, when I did that, God opened my eyes to the biblical basis for support raising. Okay. And I became so passionate about that, and passionate about people living fully funded and vision driven in ministry. Okay. And so I got sent to become a facilitator for Support Raising Solutions and begin to train our people that were already on the field, who were under budget, how to raise support well.
So to put these in different terms, because you and I might throw around some terminology that might be a little foreign to some people listening to the podcast, in a lot of ways your job changed. You still work with the same organization, but rather than you sending everybody to a quote-unquote public Support Raising Solutions boot camp, you got trained where you could lead that exact same training in-house. You could do that same training within BSM, with other BSM ministries, so that you were facilitating the boot camp, so you didn't have to take everybody to a national public one. But then additionally, you began to take on a role of becoming the coach, the advocate, the person who's noticing little organizational nuance where, hey guys, we're saying this thing, but we're doing that thing, and those don't line up. And so you you kind of got drafted into a brand new position that you got to create and dream about and mess up all by yourself.
Exactly, and I was the first one.
Yeah.
And so while doing ministry at Tarleton, I was also doing this part-time. Really, in my spare time was I doing this. And I began to work with our HR department and some of our directors and people that were in higher ups on writing policies and things that we needed to put in place for people.
Well, let me ask you about that, because I've had some similar experiences, and it wasn't always smooth sailing. Like, there was just some rough patches of learning to do that where people never said, hey, stay off my lawn. But there was a little bit of that. I've experienced a little bit of that on the HR side of things of, man, can't you just kind of do it the way everybody else is doing it? And me wanting to be respectful, but also wanting to say, well, no, because the way everybody else is doing is obviously not working, so let's not do it that way.
Right.
So what are some of the, we'll call them speed bumps, what are some of the speed bumps that you guys have hit along the way as you began this process? Because I know it's not a push a button thing. As you began a process of changing the organization and how it relates to those who raise and live off support. What are some of those speed bumps that you've hit?
Sure. Some of the speed bumps that have been very distinctive have been really with communication and how we communicate retirement, how we communicate health insurance, also in getting a structure for people who raise support to be able to track their partners and their giving.
Yeah.
That was really hard. Really, really hard.
I can imagine. By the way, I'm just curious, for those of us that use support raising software, what is your organization using?
We use MPDX.
MPDX, okay. That's a great one. I apologize for interrupting. Continue on.
So not this past Support Raising Leaders Conference, but the Support Raising Leaders Conference before, I think it was in 2017, we brought our state director and several other people to that conference. And while we were there, he started to see, wow, we don't have a structure for this.
Okay.
And so when he started to see those things, I said, okay, now we need to implement these things first.
Okay.
And so
I want to point out a key point that you're doing in this. You didn't just try and solve this all by yourself and wave a big magic wand or take control or throw a punch or anything like that. You involved senior leadership.
Yes.
And you helped them to see the problem, not just tell them what the problem is.
Right.
And you even got them involved in bringing them to a Support Raising Leaders Conference, which, by the way, SRS only does about once every year and a half. But it's 2 or 3 days just talking about these type of things. And I've seen, in fact, I've met some of your leaders, but I've seen it with other organizations where just the process of thinking and going through some of the really important core principles of foundational things for organizations. I have seen organizations change because people like yourself brought in senior leadership who went, oh, maybe we shouldn't rely on Meg to do all this by herself.
Yes.
We need to be a part of, we need to be change agents with this as well. So
yeah.
I'm glad you did it, but also for the listener, that is a fantastic way of doing it. And if you're going to be a change agent, if you're going to be leading up and leading forward in your organization, it's probably critical to get senior leadership involved in some of these changes. And they need to understand it, not just agree to it, right?
That's right, yes.
Okay.
And so from that conference, we determined we needed to have a ministry partner coach to coach all of the staff we were onboarding, including myself. I wanted coaching. I felt neglected. And I expressed that to our senior leaders. And we sat down one night and they said, this is going to take a long time. And I did throw a punch and said that is unacceptable. And the reason why was because I was already struggling in doing ministry partner development well. And I had been trained to do that and was a facilitator. And I was trying to find time to do that within my ministry and have people that were surrounding me that were encouraging me in that.
And you're supposed to be leading others too.
Exactly. And so I was feeling that, and my friends that I worked with who were living on support also were feeling that. And so I'm experiencing everybody's emotions, and I am just like, we have to make some significant changes this year.
Okay.
And so we hired a ministry partner development coach because I still wanted to stay in the field.
Okay.
And so they looked at me to do that, and I really wanted to, but I didn't feel like the Lord had released me from the college campus. And we connected our online giving platform to MPDX so that our people had a way to track their partners and their giving. And then we implemented policies on what does it mean to be fully funded, when do you have to be fully funded, things that we hadn't had. And so we're letting people come in and they're only at 30% and they're already on the campus, and then they're like, well, and
struggling and likely to quit soon, right?
Exactly. That did happen, and that was horrible.
Unfortunately for the listeners, Meghan just said it. Well, it's horrible, and I'm sure she's seen it, and I know I've seen it as well. Or people believe that God's called them to the campus or whatever their ministry is, and we don't deny that. We even agree with that. But the reality is, when you can't buy groceries and you can't, you don't really have a team of people praying for you. It's kind of like, and I don't always like war analogies, but it's kind of like a war analogy of going to the front lines with a bullet and not actually being prepared to go to war. I mean, it's like you didn't bring your rations, you didn't bring your food, you didn't bring any sort of supplies, and unfortunately, there's too many missions leaders that, their faith is big, but their competence in preparing for, and then going to the line, ready to work, it doesn't usually end well, does it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I think the war analogy is accurate. We're fighting a war for souls, and so I think that we have to be prepared.
It's important now and then that we mention that we have a resource available to those who help train and coach others that are raising support. The SRS network really isn't for everyone, but it is for those who are seeking to shape direction, build infrastructure, elevate training, and multiply coaching in their ministry culture. We can provide individual or organizational access to other support-raising resources in order to help you help others who are within your ministry. Learn more at supportraisingsolutions.org/network.
Well, now, so obviously there's some road bumps and speed bumps, and you didn't really gloss over those, but you didn't actually go into great specifics, and we're not going to, because the reality is a lot of them are going to be the same organization to organization, and sometimes they're going to be different. I know of organizations that have tried to make the change and they couldn't make it, and it came down to senior leadership just not really being invested. I've heard of other organizations where the senior leadership was very like, you will do this or you can't work here anymore. And then a lot of people that are somewhere in between. And so obviously God is blessed, and there's been a lot of changes. So if you were to, and you keep this very generalized because I know that you've been working hard at this for a while and you're not looking to throw anybody under the bus, so to speak. But if you were to give your organization maybe a letter grade, or maybe even say, hey, here's the vast improvement that I think we're doing great at, but also here's the things that I see us working on over the next year or two. Maybe share this a little bit about that, because you're very much in process, and I appreciate you being willing just to come on and share, but I also don't want you to get in trouble. I wouldn't want your organization to feel like you were bad-mouthing them.
Right.
So why don't you share some praises about what they've done, and also share some current challenges that you're wrestling with.
Right. I would say that we're in a B state, like we're like a B- maybe, if I could give us a grade. And the things that we've improved on and done well, we have trained everybody that's come on to staff with us through our private boot camp, and so we've been
Okay.
able to implement some extra things when we train them.
Well, first of all, let me say this: B is great because I know that when we first met, you probably would have given your organization a failure, right?
Right,
There would have
yes.
been it was. I remember one of our first conversations, and you were not like over the top emotional, but rightly feeling the feelings, right?
Yes,
And having
yes,
all the feelings,
yes.
and it was unhealthy, and so that's just amazing. Praise the Lord.
Yeah.
That you're saying, hey, organizational wide, when it comes to being spiritually healthy, vision driven, fully funded, you give yourselves more of a B minus or better now. So that's fantastic. So
Yeah.
great. And so briefly, what are a couple of the bigger changes that you've seen that took it from an F to a B?
Yeah, I think definitely having some policies in place where when you need to be funded, what is fully funded, is that 90%, is that 100%?
Right.
What do you need to have in a reserve fund?
Okay.
Things like that. Also, MPDX has been huge for our people.
Sure, because the organization process, right?
Exactly, yes. And then I think some of the big things was having an MPD coach. Ryan Hodges is our MPD coach.
Okay.
He's our director over that. And so he coaches and follows up with all of our new onboards and then make sure that they're going through the process well as they first set out in support raising.
That's great. And that's something we often say on the podcast as well is we hope people read the God Ask. We hope people do their homework and go to the boot camp or go to whatever training their organization provides. And yet frequently people that get fully funded, we find there's somebody who has raised their full support, that knows how to coach, that has coached them kind of over the finish line. And we think that's normal. And if you as a listener, you're not a part of BSM or an organization that provides a coach, we highly encourage you to try and find one.
Yeah.
Shake your resources, talk to people go to a boot camp, talk to others, but find somebody to walk with you. If the organization doesn't provide that, we think that lends itself to the boot camp is kind of like getting a lot of the information all at once, but a coach helps you more in the once a week check-in for like how to move forward. So that's fantastic that now BSM has that. Sounds like it's Ryan, and I know you played that role to a certain extent.
Yes, yeah.
So that's great. What are some of the on your grocery list of areas that Meg, who's unofficially speaking for BSM, would like to see some growth on over the next year or two?
So probably two things stick out. One, some sort of reminder training for our veteran staff so that they can remember what doing MPD is and how to do that well.
Okay.
I think second would be how we do salaries. We're very budget driven. It's very set. This is how much you can raise. But we have a lot of people that work in cities, people that work in rural areas, people that need more. They have large families and things like that. And that's something actually we are working on.
Good.
So it's not something that's not happening. It's just I always wish things happened immediately.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So,
I have no patience whatsoever.
No.
Yeah, and in that way, BSM is really not different from a lot of local churches and other ministries that, they have to kind of wrestle through. We want everybody to thrive. We also want to be fair. Nobody's getting into this for the money.
Right.
And yet people do need to make money, and there is a difference between the family with 6 kids and the no debt brand new car that mommy and daddy bought fresh out of college student who's going full time, right?
Yes.
Those
Yeah.
are really different perspectives. So, well, that's fantastic. Well, listen, Meg, I really appreciate you sharing a little bit about your story of how you helped to bring about the change within BSM that is really ongoing. I know that you don't take really credit for it, and yet I know that you have been a very key part of the changes, and so I appreciate you living that and modeling that, and even involving supervisors and other leadership, and respectfully maybe throwing a punch once or twice and saying this is unacceptable, but working within properly the confines of the ministry, because I know your goal is for the Lord. You want to see more college kids come to Christ, and you know that your staff they're really important in that whole process. So speak, if you would, as kind of before we close up this podcast, what's a good word of wisdom for somebody that finds himself having some influence in the organization, but not necessarily the ability or the authority to make broad changes? What would you tell that we won't even quite call them a mid-level manager, but
Right.
somebody that they're in it, but they can't do that just yet. What would you advise them?
The first thing I would advise them on is have a plan. Don't just say there's a problem. So if you notice an issue or something that is happening within your organization that needs to change, don't go to someone who can make the decision and just say this is an issue and complain about it. You need to be able to have a plan. And I think Philippians 2:12-18 talks about this a lot, about not grumbling and complaining and having some structure to what you're going to say to somebody. And so I think that's really important. The other thing that I would recommend is definitely have conversations and be open about what's going on. Don't just grumble and complain to your coworkers and then never say anything. So always have a plan if you're going to bring a problem to somebody, and then don't be a complainer.
Okay. And with everything, we want people to bathe it in prayer. God might be challenging you to be that person who puts together the plan.
Yeah.
And so we would encourage everybody, pray, build that bridge, but also, cross that bridge. Don't just pray about it for the next 20 years, but pray towards movement, what God's causing you and challenging you to do for the sake of the gospel.
Absolutely.
So, well, Meg, it is a pleasure. Thank you for joining us on the SRS podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.